I keep waiting for two chairs to be filled next to us here, thinking we can't start yet, and then I realized that we're here to swear some people in, and then we will have the chairs filled. So we certainly welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting of the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency. We'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we will invite the swearing in to take place. Everybody stand, please. Thank you. So we'd like to invite the two new board members and the one alternate to come forward. And Lenan, who is doing the swearing in? Okay, wonderful. That makes it very official. Thank you. And do you want them one at a time, or do you want them all three? Let's just go for it. Okay.
Do it this way. We don't have a handheld mic. I'm going to state the oath. Listen carefully. If you agree and you want to take this, be a member of this board, then go ahead and swear or affirm afterwards. Okay, and then I'm going to have you state your name. Okay. Solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California. That I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. You're official.
We'd invite the two new directors to come on up and be seated. And congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Let the record show that all members of the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency are present for this meeting. Do we have any changes to the existing agenda that board members wish to entertain? I'd like to request, with the board's permission, that we move item 10, board member comments, to the beginning of the time, and I'd like to give a brief report myself on a couple of things. So if that's okay with everyone, do I see any dissenting votes to do that?
Nope. Sounds great.
Seeing none, we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll move into the consent agenda. I would like to report that since our last board meeting, General Manager Deemer and myself, along with Director Saylor, went to Washington, D.C. again. And in fact, one of the direct results, I think, of those couple of days that we spent in Washington, D.C., we'll hear about in item 8, which relates to a very favorable letter that we've received from the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm not going to report on each of the meetings, but I will tell you that in a day and a half, we had 12 separate meetings. Don was telling me that this is nothing like cap to cap. It was a busy time. We felt very successful in the efforts that we had back there. Also would like to mention that last month I attended the Regional Water Authority meeting as this agency's representative in the absence of Mr. Deemer. And a very interesting discussion ensued about the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan effort that's taking place in the Sacramento Valley region. most of the discussion centered on the American River Basin Plan, which is one of the 3 plans that integrate the Sacramento region. The West Side IRWMP, which is the plan that Yolo County is participating in, and the Water Resources Association of Yolo County integrates, is another part of that plan with a third element. And the reason I bring that up is that all Prop 84 funding will come through these larger integrated regional water planning efforts, and our participation in the West Side IRWMP, which does include Yolo County, is particularly important to us as an agency. And fortunately, we do have our project now out there as part of the West Side IRWMP projects listing, which is a preliminary listing. They are not yet prioritized, but I just think the board should know that we are represented there and are moving that effort forward for regional participation. Also, I raised the question at the Regional Water Authority meeting as to how the American River Basin Plan and the other Sacramento Regional Plan will integrate with West Side, and was because of the prioritization needs, and was assured that that communication is in fact happening and will continue to happen. I also want to make the agency board members aware that on September the 17th, the Water Resources Association of Yolo County will have a very interesting meeting in the afternoon. Part of that meeting will include a 45-minute presentation from the management group handling the West Side Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. And then we will have a demonstration by individual agencies who are receiving grants from the WRA and whose projects have been uppermost in the Yolo County Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. And that'll be a kind of a wine and cheese afternoon. Elected officials from the area are all invited, both national and state and local. There will be some formal invitations that will be going out to each city council, to every member of the city council and the Board of Supervisors and UC Davis. But I want you to be aware of that, so you might put that on your calendar. The presentation on the West Side RWMP should take place around 3:45, 3:30, something like that, and then that will be followed by the reception and the individual presentations. Yes, afternoon of September 17th. Okay, that concludes my report. And are there any other reports which I neglected to request first? My apologies, but if anybody has a report, this would be a good time. Yes.
Just to mention that tomorrow morning, beginning at 7:30 at the Farm Bureau building in Woodland, Lester Snow will be speaking at a forum on the topic of water for the 21st century economy and environment, and it's a water management topic, and it's sponsored by NACWA, by Northern California Water Association.
Very good. And you don't have to be there at 7:30. It'll actually start about 8. But
Obviously, there have been a number of actions in Davis related to our water supply decision-making, but those are certainly going to be covered under item 4, so nothing more.
very good. We have a consent agenda in front of us. Anybody wish to remove any items from the consent calendar?
I'll move consent.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Deemer, we're ready for an update.
Yes, Chair Marble and board members, it's been 2 months since our last board meeting, so I want to take the opportunity this afternoon to update you on a number of topics. They're shown on the slide here. First, I want to talk about our project cost update, and then our schedule, and then get into some of the recent activities and accomplishments and what we see as important items we'll be working on in the next 3 months. This slide shows the description of the projects that have been evaluated and discussed since we last met. The current baseline project, the one that the board last saw and has been the basis upon which we've built our budget, is the 40 MGD joint project with 22 MGD going to Woodland and 18 to Davis. Since the last meeting, we've been exploring a smaller project. The agency sent out a letter to each of the 2 cities asking them to update their demand forecast through the year 2035 and then through the year 2050. And as a result of that effort, Woodland came back and said that they need 18 MGD of capacity through 2035, and Davis responded with a number of 12 MGD. In addition to that, we also looked at costs and implications of a joint project that's constructed in the 30 MGD capacity online in 2016, and what we called the phase project, which would have 18 million gallons per day coming online for Woodland in 2016, and a second phase of the 12 MGD Davis capacity coming online 4 to 5 years later. Now, this is the project cost summary slide that you saw at the last board meeting, and that was discussed and reviewed as part of our annual budget process. I won't go through this again, but the number to focus on is the $293 million total project cost. And as if you recall, that was a decrease from a total project cost of $337 million that we had as our target or as our estimate in the previous fiscal year. So in April 2012 dollars, the total project cost that was derived as part of the budget process is $293 million. As I mentioned, both cities have decreased the amount of capacity they feel they need and want through the year 2035. So as a result of that, there's been some significant changes to the configuration of the project. We now need 3 pumps at the intake facility rather than 4. We're able to reduce the raw water pipeline from 2 36-inch pipes to 1 36-inch pipe. That's the pipeline that connects the intake to the treatment facility. And we've identified a regional water treatment facility with an initial capacity of 30 MGD, as I just discussed. And Woodland has indicated that they want to be able to expand that to an additional 4 MGD in 2035. So we're looking at a project with initial capacity of 30 MGD designed to be easily or readily accommodate a 4 MGD expansion in 2035. The Woodland treated water pipelines, no change in the size of those pipes. As a result of the downsizing from 40 to 30 MGD, Davis's treated water pipeline decreases from 36 inches to 30 inches. And additionally, Woodland has taken a much closer look at the local facilities they need within their existing distribution system, and they've been able to eliminate a tank and a pipeline north of Main Street. Davis took another look at their local facilities and made no change. They had done some work on reducing their needs as part of our budget process. So as a result of these changes and significantly in reducing the size of the project from 40 to 30 MGD, we've been able to reduce the total project cost to $245 million. So wanted to let the board know that. Let the board know that going forward, we're planning to move forward with the 30 MGD project as I just described and the capacities allocation I just described. I wanted to make sure the board knew that and was comfortable with that, but I think importantly, we've been able to reduce the project cost by about $48 million. We took a quick look at the cost of phasing the project. and that number was $272 million. So that's about a $26-27 million increase to phase the project. So, further analysis suggests there may be better ways to keep the cost down than to phase the project. And it looks like the construction of the project, the entire 30 MGD at one time, is a more cost-effective way to proceed.
Dennis, would you, if it's okay, Bill, Dennis, would you explain a little bit more of why that's the case? I saw some other numbers a couple of weeks ago that started to parse out what the difference, where you really get the increase if you phase. But could you kind of highlight that on this chart?
Well, the total capital cost there are $272 million, and that compares to the cost to build the entire 30 MGD project all at once, and that would be $245 million. So a lot of the costs are associated with the work that would have to be done at the regional water treatment facility. You see here that's $122 million. If you go to the previous slide, it's $108 million. So a lot of the phasing cost, if you will, is associated with having to go back into that treatment facility twice within a 5-year period.
So it's 108 versus, I'm sorry, what was
108 versus 123.
23. Right there, you've got roughly 15 of the 25.
That's the biggest component.
Roughly. Where's the other 10? Is there another component that's... Here, I can flip the pages here, I guess, back and forth.
The program management and the agency administration costs would go up because you're basically keeping the construction activity going for an additional 5 years rather than transitioning the agency from a project management structure, program management implementation structure to a operational entity. You're keeping that component to actually design and build another project in place for an extended period of time. There's some cost also associated with the intake facility. You'd have to, under the phase project, you would have to go in and put in the pumping capacity initially for Woodland, and then you'd have to come back to the intake facility and put in pumping capacity for Davis's 12 MGD, so that adds an increment of cost. The cost for the treated water pipelines don't change that much. There's a little bit of additional cost there to redesign them separately. But those are the major components, I would say.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yes.
It's high tech. And you talked about the reduction to 136-inch pipeline. What is the capacity of that line? And in the original discussions with some of the engineers, I haven't been on this board for a while, the desire for having two pipelines was in case you had a failure or something with one another. And so now what I see you recommending is reduction to one. So the two questions has to do with the risk factor and the capacity. Thank you.
Well, the first question, Board Member Davies, is in terms of the capacity. The one 36-inch pipeline will convey the 30 million gallons per day at a velocity that's considered the low end of the range. And thinking ahead to when we would add 4 MGD of additional capacity for Woodland, the velocities would go up a little bit, but still within what is considered a standard operating range. So if the 36-inch pipeline will accommodate that 4 MGD additional expansion in Woodland. You do give up some redundancy in terms of being able to shut down one pipeline and go to the other. But in looking at it and having our technical team look at it, both cities are still going to have groundwater as a component of their water supply portfolio. They're going to have a conjunctive use strategy. And so taking down the pipeline for short periods of time for maintenance or whatever is doable under that scenario.
Let me go back to ask my question a little more clearly. I understand if we added the 4 million gallons a day for Woodland, what is the overall capacity of that pipe? In other words, is it how much can you stretch it if there's growth 20, 30 years down the road that we don't anticipate or needs that we don't anticipate? Just asking for the capacity.
So it has to do with how much energy you need to push the water through and how high the velocities can go. You probably don't want to go much below 3 or 3.5 feet per second as a practical matter to prevent solids from settling out. If you get too low, you get settling and accumulation in the pipe. If you get too high, if you get up 9, 10, 11 feet per second, your energy costs start to be excessive, and that's where you're paying more for the energy than you might be just to put in a new pipe. So there's no fixed capacity. It's keeping the velocities high enough to prevent solids deposition and not too high as to have exorbitant energy costs to pump the water.
Given the desired velocity, I'm going to get there. Just be patient.
All right.
Given the desired velocity, what is the maximum capacity of that pipeline?
Boy, I don't have that offhand. We could run a calculation, run the velocity up to 15 feet per second and see how much we could get through there. But
This is your engineering SAT test, oral question.
Yeah. I've got all these engineers on the other side of the room checking on me here.
Don?
What's the expected life of the project once it's constructed?
The pipeline components and the concrete components have, assuming they're properly maintained, 75 to 100 years. The concrete might need to be refurbished, gone and fixed up, but it's certainly on the order of 50 to 100 years.
And the treatment facilities similar?
The mechanical components, the pumps, the chemical feeds, the tanks and that sort of thing would have to be replaced on the order of 20, 25 years.
Okay, so if for some reason there was a desire by either of the two cities to expand beyond the 34, with 30 years from now, what would be the constraint that would prevent them from doing it?
Well, if you go, the analysis that both Woodland and Davis did, Davis feels comfortable that their 12 million gallons a day will last through 2050. Woodland feels that they'll need to add that increment of 4 MGD in about 2035. So you're going to be, the facility that you're putting in place with one minor addition in around 2035 is good through 2050. Beyond that, the question is going to be, well, how much more will you need? And you would need to put in additional pipelines. You'd need to expand your treatment plant. But that's so far down the road that we're not really making provisions or planning to make provisions specifically as to how that would be accomplished.
What does the city of Davis currently use?
I don't have that number. I don't know if Herb or Bob I don't have that number. We could get that for you.
I guess it
Mr.
comes
Taylor.
to a question of is there some capacity within the 12 for the city of Davis that allows some level of population projection?
There is an assumed growth
there is.
projection in that 12 MGD number. There's also an assumption for conservation in the number as well.
Right. Good.
So the question is, what's our annual water use, or would that answer the question at least? So right now, we are about between 10 and 12, depending on the year. 2010, we were at 11 MGD. 2011, we were at 10.5. Our water use this year, we're up 10% of our water use from last year already this year. So
12 is just about current.
Correct.
So was there any, Dennis said there was a growth rate anticipated in the use?
When we're
or-
doing our projections, we're using a 0.5% increase for the first 5 years, and then we're using a 1% increase thereafter.
Okay, good, thanks.
Dennis, I have one question. Using the groundwater system as the backup in times when the pipes have to be maintained, does that mean a different system of groundwater pumps and wells would have to be maintained and by going to the one pipe option, or is it the same that would be maintained anyway?
It's the same conjunctive use component. In Davis's case, they're going to continue to rely on their deep water wells. You're not going to pump them as hard when the surface water project comes online. And in Woodland's case, they're planning to develop ASR wells, aquifer storage and recovery wells, so they'll be able to inject water into the basin during the wet periods of the year. Okay, if there's no questions on the costs, let's like to next turn to the schedule. And this is the schedule again that you saw at your last board meeting and that we have had in place for some time now. I've highlighted the 4 milestones or interim milestones that we really need to focus on. And, you know, as I think is pretty well understood at this point, Davis has continued to work on their project refinement and their affordability of the project and project alternatives and selections through their Water Advisory Committee. At the time we put this schedule together, the plan was to, that Davis had anticipated going to a vote this November, and that the approval of the funding would be known at that time, or at least the approval of the project. That date, as we understand it, has been moved to March. So we have that change in the schedule that needs to be addressed. We've identified issuing the final RFP for the DBO contract in December. And that's an important date because that leads to being able to actually go through the process of soliciting proposals, receiving proposals, evaluating proposals, and selecting the DBO firm and awarding the contract in September of 2013, next September. And that date is critical or important because that is the amount of time that's needed then to complete the overall project by August of 2016.
Dennis, help me, that date was a date we moved from, the originally adopted date by this board was February?
March or April, something.
March?
Of 2016. I think we moved it about 6 months, as I recall.
For issuing the RFP.
Oh,
Wasn't
no,
that
I'm sorry. That was for
February
the
or
completion
March
date.
of this
It was,
year?
no, it was about a year. It was supposed to be this past January.
Okay. So we
January,
slid
February.
that as far as we felt we possibly could slide that in going to the November when we made that decision.
That's
Okay.
correct. So we have not formally sat down with the DBO teams to discuss this change with them. We wanted to hear from Davis in terms of the continuation of their interest in the project. Now that that has occurred, our plan is to sit down here in short order with the design build operator teams, discuss with them how we can continue to have a final RFP issued in December, but at the same time preserve both the joint project option as well as an option that would have Woodland going by themselves for an 18 MGD project. So we have some ideas, we have some thoughts as to how we might make that work, but we need to sit down with the DBO teams, get their input, get their thoughts, and figure out how we can meet that December date and at the same time keep both the joint project option as well as the Woodland-only option open. Okay. So now I just want to quickly kind of run through some of the things that we've been working on, some of the things that have been accomplished in the last couple of months. We've already talked about the response from Woodland and Davis, verifying the new Phase 1 capacities. We continue to pursue SRF low-interest loans, grant funding opportunities. Since we last met, we've submitted our project to the West Side IRWMP that Director Marble mentioned earlier. We've submitted a funding request to the Coalition to Support Delta Projects. It's a broad group of stakeholders that are primarily focused on the fix to the Delta and what other worthy projects might be part of that Delta project, and focus primarily as well as on the in Delta County efforts. And we continue to support Davis's Water Advisory Committee process. We made a couple of presentations. One was to the Yolo County Board of Supervisors, and thanks to Supervisor Saylor for that invitation. And we've also had an opportunity to have update meetings with each of the new agency board members. You know, remember at the last meeting we talked about whether we should do that as part of a formal meeting or just do it individually. We chose the latter, and those meetings had been conducted. With respect to regional facility planning, we have finalized the revised location of our regional treatment facility site. We've incorporated or developed a scope of work for suggestions that have come from the DBO teams at a workshop we held into the final design. We completed a security study for the intake facility and have now identified design criteria that will be incorporated into the intake facility. Importantly, we completed the dewatering of the site and completed the site fill design, and not only solicited bids but actually received bids this week. This is a hot off the press summary of what happened on Monday afternoon. The City of Woodland received 6 bids for the site fill project. The low bid was $2.6 million. The high bid was $4.2 million. Engineers' estimate was right in the middle at $3.3 million. The 3 low bids were 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, so a very, very favorable bid result. We had an agency budget of $2.975 million, so we're well within that budget amount. And just Tuesday night, Davis City Council approved a payment of $376,000 for the site differential cost, the difference in the cost of a Woodland-only sized fill versus the size fill for the joint project. So next step, Woodland's going to confirm the low bidders' qualifications. That process is underway, and we would anticipate an award of that contract here in early September by the City of Woodland. With respect to environmental and permitting activities, we've made good progress.
Can I,
Yes.
Bill, can I
Hold on.
I'm sorry, thanks. Do we have any, we actually get 3 bids that were below the engineer's estimate?
Yes,
And how many bids?
6.
6 came in, half were below. Okay, so I guess that's kind of
Yep.
about right, yeah. I'm just curious if there's anything else we could read into the bid.
I think it's
It was certainly more favorable than we thought, but it looks like some others were higher too, so.
I think the two things. One is I think that it demonstrates that there's still a very favorable bid climate out there, that we were able to come in 20% below the engineer's estimate, so that's a very good thing. And the second thing, just in terms of the bid process itself and these bids, the fact that you have 3 that are closely grouped at the lower end tells you that there is very competitive, and you probably have a good bid from your low bidder. That's to be verified. But you hate to see the low bidder, a lot lower than the next lowest bidder. It sometimes indicates that they missed something or forgot something. So the fact that they're closely grouped tells you that it's encouraging that the bid price is in that $2.6 million range.
I think it also suggests that the documents that were bid were clear. If you have that kind of a cluster that the bidders are all coming in around the same area, then they're bidding on the same job.
Okay, West Yost was very happy that they were right in the middle. That's always a good sign when you're doing the engineer's estimate. If you hit it in the middle, you've done a very good job.
I think, let me just point out also for board members or public that are here that part of when we deferred from February to November beginning the DBO process, that was only able to be done because we could begin on our own the dewatering of this site and the site fill and have that bid out on our own. Not only do we feel that that allowed us to go to November, but we also feel in the long run it will save us some dollars because of the additional security that our DBO firms will feel in bidding on the overall project, because we've already done that step, which had some issues of its own. So just point that out.
So in terms of environmental and permitting activities, we've made good progress in the last couple of months. The Army Corps of Engineers issued the public notice on the 404 application. No substantive comments were received. Meetings with the resource agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service have indicated they plan to get their biological opinions completed by the end of September. The biological opinions are important because that will allow the Bureau of Reclamation to issue a what's known as a FONSI, or a finding of no significant impact, and that's part of the environmental documentation process. Finally, on the state CEQA side, RD 2035 is scheduled to approve as lead agency for CEQA, approve the initial study environmental assessment on August 28th, and that will allow us to complete the California CEQA component of the environmental documentation. We've had meetings with WAPA. Good news here, looks like the agency will be able to use WAPA power at the intake facility, and that will save a significant amount of money on the energy cost at the intake. We've also made some progress with Yolo County Public Works Department regarding the universal encroachment permit conditions. They submitted comments to us, and the agency's in the process of responding to those comments, but we're moving forward on that encroachment process. This slide talks about supplemental water supply and specifically what's going on in Woodland. Woodland has completed their aqueduct storage and recovery work plan. They've modified well 28 to accommodate ASR. A lot of work on an ASR injection test. We've also completed a geochemical model for the surface water groundwater mixing, and began scoping a regional groundwater model with the various stakeholders in Yolo County. With respect to land and right-of-way acquisitions, we've completed appraisals for all non-CPG properties. You recall that as part of the water purchase with CPG, they've given us access to easements for quite a bit of the pipeline alignments, but these are the non-CPG properties. So we continue work on those, provided CPG with final maps in the relocated regional water treatment facility, and we're continuing an appraisal for a portion of the Davis treated water pipeline alternative alignment, which is we've been calling the Harlan bypass. We talked about these already in many respects. I think the fourth bullet here, we will continue our efforts to optimize the cost of the project and continue to work with the Davis Water Advisory Committee as necessary. And then finally, I want to just make one point about the finalizing the RFP with the DBO teams. We're going to need to start work on that probably in the October timeframe if we're going to meet that December issuance date. So that becomes another target date that we need to keep in mind, whether it's the joint project, whether it's the Woodland only project, whether it's both projects in parallel. about October is the time we need to start working on that. I won't go through this in detail. These are things that we'll be working on over the next 3 months. Basically continuing the environmental documentation and permitting processes. I guess I would mention just one point, the second to the last bullet. We're planning to issue an RFQ and then an RFP for a regional water treatment facility site aerosol study. You recall a couple of meetings ago we were talking to the board about the relocated regional treatment facility site and our discussions with CDPH, California Department of Public Health. And this is kind of belts and suspenders, but we want to go in and verify that there are no aerosols coming from either the tomato processing facility or the treatment plant that would reach the site. So this will be something that we'll be able to provide the results of this study to CDPH and confirm that issue, hopefully will turn out to be a non-issue. I want to, on this, in terms of land and right-of-way acquisitions, bring to the board's attention that we're in the process of getting ready to send final offer letters to 3 or 4 of our property owners that we need to acquire right-of-way from. 2 of those letters are ready to go out. So what I propose to do is we'll provide the board a copy when those letters are issued so that you know which property and which property owners we're needing to move forward on, and that we're kind of at a stalling point or impasse. We continue to have some difficulty with the Sierra Northern Railroad, and we're going to be having a meeting here in early September. So I'm hopeful that that meeting will help us move those property right acquisitions forward. There is one parcel that has an encumbrance on it that the owner is no longer around, so we're going to need to perhaps use the eminent domain process to get that title cleared. But just wanted to bring that to the board's attention, that we do have a couple of property owners that we're going to be sending some final offer letters to. September through December, we're going to integrate the suggestions from the intake workshops with our DBO team into the final design. I mentioned we did a security study. Those recommendations will also go into the design. And our target date for complete 100% design for the joint intake facility is this next month. So it'll probably be another month or so before we get the approvals from the Bureau and complete the permitting process. But that project will be shovel-ready, as they say, here in a couple of months. We will be awarding the site fill contract, and we anticipate completing that site fill contract in November. With that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions the board may have.
Any questions, board members?
Dennis, would you go back to the aerosol study? I didn't quite understand it. Had to do with the relocation of the treatment plant?
Yes. There we go. Saying less. Director Davies, initially we had identified a location for the water treatment plant that was north and east of the existing wastewater plant, and it was adjacent to the tomato processing operation. So we looked at alternative sites and better sites, and quite frankly sites that would be less costly to the overall project, and we identified some ponds, converted ponds, that were owned by the city of Woodland, and we thought that was a much better site, got us further away from the tomato processing, met all of our water supply, water treatment plant needs, we met with the California Department of Public Health and wanted to inform them that we were planning to do that and make sure that they were comfortable with that. We had some preliminary meetings with them. They did raise some questions and related to the proximity to the wastewater treatment plant. As a result of those initial meetings, we moved the site from the ones that were the southernmost ponds to the ones that are northwesternmost, the greatest distance from the water treatment or the wastewater plant. I thought that was very positively received by the CDPH. They did want to see if we had any additional data on aerosols, transported particles from the wastewater treatment plant. And whereas the city has a lot of data on wind and wind direction and wind velocities, we don't have any information on that. So we thought it would be prudent and proactive to commission a study over the next 12 or 18 months. We're going to flesh out the time period as part of the proposal process, but to actually go out and do some aerosol testing and hopefully confirm that none of the aerosols leaving the wastewater treatment plant site are reaching our water treatment plant site. So that's the proposed project that we're getting ready to undertake. Rick? Questions?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I would like to point out that we would have been doing this aerosol study at the former site also, that Department of Public Health had some concerns about the aerosols from the distribution of waste, of tomato wastes on that site, and they had equal, if not more, concerns about that there. So we would have been doing this anyhow.
Director Cravoza.
Yeah, Bill, you talked about it in your comments, but I'm going to apologize to my colleagues. I think I've just lost track a little bit. And so I'd like to ask Dennis, could you give us, Dennis, as kind of a succinct summary as possible of where we really are with the intake funding and the Bureau? The dollar figures, what we think the feds are moving toward, or I'm not sure what the right word is for think, where they are in that process, and then the state matching fund requirement. I think this is so important because it's a good amount of funding, and the level of certainty that does or does not exist around that. I'd love to understand that better.
Would you be comfortable if we hold that question to item 8, where we will actually discuss the letter that relates to that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah, just at that point.
Let's do it all together.
Make it an overview at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
In the bigger content, and I do want to relate it to kind of the project costs that we're looking at here in this report. But that's fine with me. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be great.
Good.
Because I have some additional comments I would like to make about that then too.
Perfect.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Deemer, for that presentation. We're on to item 4, the status of City of Davis participation. Who is going to take the lead there?
I was just going to say that at your places, we prepared a memo that provides you with information on the recommendation that the Water Advisory Committee in Davis made to the City Council, as well as the motion that the City Council adopted last Tuesday night relative to the Woodland Davis project. Also provided some information in there about the schedule, which we've already discussed in the previous report. So the thought was that with that background information, it would be time for the board to, discuss the status of the activities in Davis and in Woodland, and what impacts that might have on the agency's project. I don't know, Dick.
Okay.
If you had any, no?
Well, let me turn first of all to the mayor of Davis and let you just add anything. We do have this report in front of us, and I think none of us have escaped the news media, which isn't always accurate. So if there's anything I think all of us know that. So if there's anything you'd like to add there, and Brett, you too, that would be great.
Sure. Maybe I'll start, and then I'd love Brett to jump in, and then staff as well. But we've asked our Water Advisory Committee in Davis to advise the council on three primary matters. One is project selection. The other is the DBO process, and the third is the rates. And so at their August 16th meeting, the Water Advisory Committee brought to us a recommendation on the first point, which is project selection. And they didn't go as far as to select a project. Rather, in essence, they said to proceed with both projects, but they gave the City Council kind of their requested thoughts on how each project could potentially proceed in a way that was beneficial to Davis. And for this project, they advised the 18 MGD, 12 MGD Woodland Davis split, but also advised discussions to go forward on the sharing of the cost of the pipeline and the sharing of the percentages of the entire project. And then the WAC said they would continue to work on the DBO. With respect to West Sacramento, they advised the city to have further discussions with West Sacramento with a much reduced connection fee, again at our expected need of 12 MGD, and essentially a 60-year contract with the city of West Sacramento, and that this should take place within 60 days. So at our meeting Tuesday night, the council formally accepted the recommendation of the Water Advisory Committee, and then recognizing the WAC's kind of 60-day timeline to move forward with West Sacramento. We recognized that kind of as an outer limit on the council coming to a decision itself. And so actually Brett and I worked together and put together a motion here, but basically accepting the recommendation of the WAC formally, and then in 60 days or perhaps less to have discussions with Woodland and West Sacramento with the framework provided by the WAC as our basic guideline, and then to bring that back to the WAC. They've taken a great amount of time and attention on this matter, and there's some reason for a little bit of interpretation in what they've done, so we want to make sure we go back to them and whatever we do, make sure we get a thumbs up, hopefully from them, or at least have any sense of if they think we've strayed from their recommendation. So that's where we are, as Dennis's report points out, kind of for reasons of timing and conflicts and Brown Act and so on. Brett and I are the appointed representatives to West Sacramento, and Mayor Pro Tem Wolk and Councilmember Swanson are to pursue the discussions with Woodland. So, because if Brett and I were to talk to Woodland, as soon as we talk to one of you, then we've got a Brown Act issue with the JPA. So actually that was probably almost one of the longer parts of our discussion Tuesday night. Brett was kind of figuring out how we construct these discussions to kind of carry out the recommendations as best possible of the Water Advisory Committee. So that's where we are. There's maybe, hopefully I haven't created more questions than I've answered. Brett, I don't know if you'd like to add a little more flavor to that, and then and I'd like to ask staff as well, just to make sure we haven't missed anything.
That was a good summary. I guess I would just add that we did vote for the cost sharing of the fill project.
That's right. Absolutely right. I mean, I think there is recognition that as this proceeds forward, we need to honor the partnership that we've got going, and so yeah. And we were delighted that the price of the fill project came in, a good, $100 100,000 plus more or less than we had expected, more than $100,000 less than what we expected.
Herb or Bob, anything to add there?
Thanks.
It's kind of tough to correct your council members, I know.
That's right. That was a good report, wasn't it, Herb?
That was a great report. Unless any of the directors have a specific question, we have nothing to add.
Any questions?
Actually, I'll be more impressed if you guys can find something wrong. But thanks.
Any questions? Any questions?
Yeah.
Seeing none, thank you for the
Yeah, I mean, I guess
discussion.
the only thing I would add is that I want to invite, members of this body from Woodland and staff from Woodland, and I mean everybody to just, keep the discussions going as possible wherever there's questions about, what's happening. I think this is going to be a particularly important period to have good communication. As we move forward in whatever plays itself out. So I just offer that and encourage that as much as possible.
I think from my perspective as an individual, not speaking for the council certainly, but I certainly appreciate the willingness of the Davis Council to at least pay the incremental cost and give that vote of confidence that allowed the fill to go forward as we had previously agreed, and remind you that it wasn't your share of the cost. You're just paying the little bit of incremental cost, but when the partnership does mature and take off the way it's intended, then that would be shared according to the cost-sharing agreement.
Right.
But we appreciate that and still are optimistic. Okay.
Chair Marple?
Yes.
I don't know if you were planning to do the public comment at the end, or if you wanted to invite public comment on the items as we go along. I don't know if anybody in the audience wants to speak on this
Thank
issue,
you. Is any member of the public wish to speak on this item?
I just want to apologize. Actually, I'm double booked, so I'm about to run off to another meeting, and it's my apologies to everyone here, but I'm about to run late for.
You won't get paid.
You can give it to Joe.
Well, we'll double it actually.
Pretty tough to cut in half zero, isn't it?
Good. No, thanks, Brett, and welcome to the JPA. Good to have you here and digging in. And I think everybody probably knows this, but Brett has been exceptionally active in Davis in following these water matters and following the work of the WAC. So he's well up to speed with so much of what we're doing here already. So
Anyway,
great.
Thank you for having me, and again, I apologize for having to zip off to the
Yeah,
next meeting.
I think we'd invite you to get together with Herb or Bob to go over the remaining items, because financing will be discussed as well as this intake structure, which has really has some huge elements to it. Good. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, may I speak?
Absolutely. Come forward, state your name, and tell us where you're from. And
Thank you. The timer says 1 minute. Is it a 1 minute?
well, we
2 or
reduced
3?
it to 30 seconds, actually, but no,
Maybe
you have 3
15.
minutes. You have 3 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael Harrington. I'm a downtown Davis resident, and I practice aviation law in downtown Davis. I'm not around water law. The closest I come to water law is maybe a case 2 years ago I had in Oregon where a Epic LT crashed in the ocean. We had to decide if it was maritime law or aviation law, and aviation law won. So I got into water law at that point. But I just wanted to come down and introduce myself. I know some of you already, and some of you I've seen on TV, and maybe you've seen me on TV. But I just wanted to say that I got interested in this last summer because of the Davis rate structure. I wasn't paying attention to the water plant or the JPA or anything else. And then when the council voted for these rates on September 6th, it was sort of a 911 emergency for us. And so we just threw ourselves into the mix and kind of took a time out. And I know that for Woodland, I'm sure that was a shocking thing, and I'm sorry for that. We had no time to come to Woodland to talk to Woodland. We either did it right then or it was a dead issue. So I just wanted to say that we are here to maintain communications, to keep communications open, as Mayor Cravosa said earlier. I'm an hourly lawyer, so I'm down here away from my files as a volunteer. And just to say that as a member of the leadership team of the 2011 Water Referendum Committee, we are here to keep the lines of communication open. We see that both communities need good, safe, and affordable water, and that's the goal. That's our fiduciary obligation to all concerned. And we felt like the September 6th Davis water rates would unfairly prejudice the poor and the middle class in Davis. And so we're interested in that. That's our motive. We're not fiscally interested in any of these things. And we were wondering, I know the JPA has been started and everything, and sorry about maybe asking for a change of strategy, but Davis is interested in looking for water with the best rate and good clean water. And it seems to us that asking Woodland to enter into a contract with us directly, instead of having the umbrella JPA agency, the extra staffing costs, the political complexity, we're very interested in how to do a water deal that works, that's affordable and works for everybody. So it may be too late. This JPA is pretty far down the road, but I'm a trial lawyer, and trials are uncertain, and elections are even more uncertain. So Davis will have an election, and keeping the communications open and having an understanding of things prevents a lot of issues later. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, and you all have a good day.
Thank you for your comments. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Marvel, I just had a question for actually the board and staff. I'm looking ahead on agenda items. One of the things Dennis covered in his staff report, and it was also in the recommendation from the City of Davis, relates to reducing the water treatment plant phase from 40 MGD to 30 MGD. That particular change and changing the 12 and 18 MGD shares can be made by this board. And the question to Dennis and the board is, would you like that one issue to come back to this board at your October meeting to consider officially reducing the scope of the project to those percentages? You did a similar thing, I don't know when, 12 months ago, when you reduced the project to from 52 to 40. It'd be the same type resolution, and I'm just thinking ahead, should we prepare for that, or just wait and see how discussions go with the City of Davis?
Gosh, there's a lot of nuances, I think, to when the timing is best to do that. I think I would suggest that we let staff discuss that, and we can formalize whether that comes on the agenda. If the board wishes to give me that ability, we'll place it on the agenda if it's deemed by both staffs to be worthwhile to do that. That'd be okay?
I guess I would just add that I think that would work fine from staff perspective. I don't anticipate or foresee any activity that we need to do that couldn't be done, as long as there's an understanding at the board level that we are, planning on a 30 MGD size project, and that at the appropriate time, that along with some of these other issues that are being discussed in Davis and between Davis and Woodland would come forward for a formal adoption or approval.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't sense there's any disagreement in the board with reducing the capacity. But again, I think staff needs to deal with that a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Good question.
So the next item is item 5. It's an update regarding project funding and financing. This is an item that the board has requested that we report on at every meeting. So this is just an update on the activities. As I mentioned at our last meeting, the SRF funding continues to be one of our more viable and likely sources of low-interest loans and funding for the project. Since our last meeting, we have submitted the applications, received comment back from the agencies that they've received our revised applications, and we've set up meetings to go to Sacramento to talk to them about the revised applications, and the goal or the plan would be to work with them to elevate the ranking of our project high enough on their category list to receive funding. So we'll report back to the board as those meetings progress. That's the main point that's made in your report. The other thing I just wanted to bring to the board's attention is an effort that we're planning to initiate relative to financing. And we thought it would be timely to set up a workshop, a financing workshop with both cities, with both cities' financial advisors, maybe some outside experts to come in a workshop environment, explore the current interest rate environment, various debt structuring opportunities, look at what other entities have done in the way of financing to lower their overall project costs, and use it as an opportunity and a follow-on to the board's request and direction to continue to look for ways to lower cost, and also to explore and better understand how different debt issuance structures combined with SRF funding would potentially affect and lower the actual rate increases that Davis and Woodland have to pass on to their customers. So we're going to be putting that plan into effect. Would certainly let the board know and check your calendars when we actually schedule that. We would view it as an opportunity to educate not only all of us that are involved in the project, but any stakeholders or members of the public that might be interested as well. Just wanted to make sure that the board was comfortable with that plan.
Does that, Dennis, does that dovetail with the rates discussion in Davis?
Yes.
Or yeah,
Yes.
So we'd sync that. You know,
In Davis's case, I think it would be a further refinement or optimization on some preliminary work that's been done on, deferring the rate increases or softening the
Right.
impacts of the rate increases in the early years. It would explore how that concept might be further refined, and I think there would be information that would be of benefit and of use to Woodland as well in that regard, since they're very early in their process.
Right. Good. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, one view is that, Davis gets a price and then figures out how to do the rates based upon the price, right? And how much we'd have to bond up and obviously pay those bonds. The other is to make it a little more integrated and think about whether or not there's any, ways in which the JPA can help Davis and Woodland, certainly, in this kind of rate softening, I guess, maybe is the term that we're using. And if the latter is the case, which it sounds like it is, I certainly appreciate that. It's a nice way for us all to be rolling up our sleeves together. Even if there's not a lot of change or any change, it certainly gets the juices flowing. And I think actually some of the things that we're considering doing in Davis on the softening side and the way the bonds might be let could be of great interest to Woodland.
I don't anticipate that it's going to be that there would be that the purpose would not be to identify what opportunities might be available from the JPA versus the individual cities. I think it's being set up or intended to be more of an educational discussion, exploring of information. Certainly would want to have both the financial advisors in each city on board and help us develop the agenda. But to the extent that ideas come out of that, there may be an opportunity to further pursue them.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Move forward. Anything you or Paul are going to add about financing, or does that conclude that item?
Anything to add?
Okay, thank you very much. Item 6 is a consideration of a task order. Richard, are you going to handle this one?
Yes, I will cover this one. To remind the board and explain to the new directors, some time ago, the agency entered into a contract with Reclamation District 2035 for the joint development, design, and construction of an intake on the river. Pursuant to that intake agreement, RD 2035 and the agency entered into a three-way agreement with MWH Americas as the project design engineer. MWH has been working diligently on project design, and as Dennis explained in his staff report, they hope to complete that in September. They're well along in final design. As the staff report explains, and as Dennis referenced in his staff report, as part of this further evaluation, and in particular some recent meetings with MWH, the agency staff and MWH have decided that changes to the project design, some more additional work by MWH would be appropriate. And so we have put together and recommend to the agency board this task order number 3 that would further amend the three-way engineering services agreement with MWH to include the scope of services set forth in the proposed task order. These new services would include some additional, more detailed architectural work and visualization of that, some electrical systems modifications, changes to incorporate some good constructive comments from our DBO contractors, some changes relating to the crossing of the railroad in the vicinity of the proposed intake, and some cost allocation information. The total cost of the work would be approximately $120,000. Under the joint intake agreement, we have certain cost-sharing obligations worked out with 2035. In applying that, $84,000 of the cost relates to the agency's facilities, and therefore rightfully would be borne by the agency. $36,000 would be RD 2035's share of these costs. As to RD 2035, they've got more funding problems than because of the limited design money grant they received from the Bureau. And the proposal before you is, as part of the joint intake agreement, the agency agreed to provide a 5% local cost share to enhance our federal and state grant funding efforts. And the $36,000 it's proposed would be paid by the agency, but then booked as a credit towards that 5% local cost share to try and make our grant funding efforts more attractive. So that's the proposal before the board, and engineering staff's available here as well if you have any more detailed questions on the scope of work. Otherwise, we recommend approval of the task order 3.
Questions?
None. I'm happy to move approval.
Any all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move to the long-range board calendar. You have that in front of you, and as I mentioned at our last board meeting, the November date is impossible for me because of responsibilities with the League of Cities Board of Directors, and I'm wondering if the board would agree to move that meeting either to November 8th, also a Thursday, which is 2 days after the election, or to the Monday the 19th, or Tuesday the 20th, or Tuesday the 13th.
I'll be gone the first date. The 9th, I'll be.
The 8th?
The 8th, I'm sorry. That's
Okay.
right, I'll be out.
Okay.
So I'm going to have you read the other ones.
13th, 19th, and 20th. Same time in the afternoon. Okay, so that would be out. Monday the 19th or Tuesday the 20th. All of those dates. So you're going to have a sub here anyway? Okay.
I mean, Don, on the 13th, is that, you're out on the 13th, you said?
Yes.
Okay, it's every date, okay.
Well, clearly, the board will, you should meet whenever your voting members are available.
Yeah.
Bill, I
Skip, do you
think,
have issues?
I just going to say that I believe the 20th would be a council meeting in Woodland, so maybe the 19th, the Monday might be the logical choice. I don't hear anybody else having that issue.
Is that, I know, Dennis, we've got a really sticky timetable there.
I was just going to say that all the dates work for me except for the 19th would be problematic.
Well, how about the 20th? Well, is the 20th a board meeting also?
No.
How about the 20th, like at 2 in the afternoon, where we could get back to our cities certainly in adequate time?
That's fine.
That would be, this is presumably.
November 20th.
Yeah, this is let's see, Woodland, this is a Woodland meeting at 2?
Currently.
Davis.
Okay.
So October would be in Woodland.
I see.
Unless-
Yeah, I mean, 2 o'clock on the 20th works fine for me.
Does that work for you, Skip? Okay. Does that work for you, Don?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll put it at Tuesday, the 20th, for that date going forward. Thank you very much. Now we're down to correspondence, and we've got the CDPH letter. Dennis, do you want to discuss those two items and the Bureau of Rec letter?
Yes, the first letter is from CDPH, and it follows on to the conversation that we had regarding our SRF funding. We had made the point in our application that we're starting to experience hexavalent chrome in our well water, and they simply in this letter point out that that's currently not regulated, so it's not an issue that counts toward the prioritization. They do acknowledge the receipt of the applications, and so it's basically confirming that, and subsequent to this receipt of this letter, we've set up meetings to go talk to them about our revised application. The other letter is the one that was mentioned earlier, Director Cravoza, related to the funding and the firmness of the funding. This letter from the Bureau confirms that the joint intake project is their top priority. It acknowledges the request for $16.7 million in funding and federal funding, and it says that they are planning to provide those fundings over the 3 fiscal years, fiscal year 12, 13, and 14. So that's a very positive development and confirmation of their commitment to the 50% federal share. We have received a letter previously from Director Laird at the state saying that they've always come up with state matching funds on these types of projects, and that they don't see this particular project being any different. We're still in the process of working with the state on identifying the specific pot of money that the matching $16.7 million will come from, but we do have their commitment in that confirmation that they have every intention of matching the federal commitment as they have on many other projects, fish screen projects like this. The balance of the total fish screen project is about, at least the portion that's being constructed jointly with RD 2035 has a cost of $39 to $40 million. So the difference between the two federal matching, the federal and state funds, is the portion of the project that's not eligible for grant reimbursement, and it's the local share that Mr. Shanahan mentioned earlier. And that differential is reflected in the cost estimates that we reviewed previously as part of the overall total project cost.
5%.
5%, and then additionally, there are some pumps and electrical gear that we're going to be asking the DBO contractors to install. So you take the non-eligible share from the state and feds, and then you add the portion that we'll ask the DBO teams to install, and that's the numbers that you see in the cost breakdown on the summary slide that I showed earlier.
You know, as we change the volume of our project, does our kind of relation within the intake adjust?
The size of the pumps and the electrical gear are downsized, and we save money. The physical size of the structure and the fish screen does not change. The capacity is still going to be 400 CFS, and the arrangement is that the agency's portion is 80 CFS, and the RD 2035 can pump 320. But there's provisions that you can pump up to 400. For example, if the agency was not using its full 80, then the RD 2035 could pump up to 400.
Right. So 400 CFS, yeah, is the total. But the 80-20 split.
Correct.
Made with.
Correct. And the fish screen has to be sized to handle that 400 CFS, and irrespective of how the split between the agency and RD 2035 occurs.
At our point structure where we can down, we will.
Yes. Yes.
You could. Oh, I see. RD 2035, if they wanted to, could presumably increase maybe their pumping capacity because of that 400 CFS. We're going to downsize and not need 20% of that 20 CFS.
At least in the foreseeable future, that's
Right.
And their current intake is sized for 400 CFS, so they're basically matching the current pumping capacity only with a modern facility that has the appropriate fish.
Yeah, I think that's really a significant point that we're asked constantly over the last 2 years being back in Washington, are you increasing the capacity of this intake? And the answer is no, and that's why we're getting so much federal funding and state funding out of it, and it's good.
Right.
So, it's good for the cities, certainly.
Right. So we're really kind of riding on it when they're not taking their, they're still building up a 400 CFS pump and a 400 CFS facility, and then we're building ours to be able to take our share below that. But at certain points where we shut down completely, if they want to take a full 400, they'll be able to do it, which gets us to this higher percentage of federal funding. Bill, is that?
Yeah, well, the fish screen is entirely funded federally and state. We're not paying any part of that fish screen. I don't think the public really understands how much savings has been achieved by what has been worked out over the last 3 years, and that's really a significant issue. This intake facility is at a very, I don't want to say delicate point, but it is somewhat at a delicate point because though we've received this federal letter, we still have state funds that, though seemingly committed, we've got to make sure are committed. But to lose that partnership with RD 2035, where 95% of the cost is being paid for outside of this agency, that's huge. And is one of the reasons why, one of the questions that I've read frequently from people commenting about the Davis situation is, well, the pipe to West Sac is only so long, the pipe to Woodland is so long, why this big difference? Well, people are failing to understand how very little Davis is paying for that intake. And Woodland. I
And
mean,
Woodland, right,
if it is able to continue and be consummated. And really, that together with the previous discussion about the deal points relative to the easements, which RD 20, which we have with the Conaway, those are huge issues, I think. So, and those agreements, I might point out, though Mr. Harrington's left, those agreements are all with the JPA, not with any individual cities. So it's a little bit of a complicated situation in terms of any suggestions like he made.
Yep. Thanks, Dennis, for taking a little more time just to kind of refresh us on that, because I know it's so big. Okay.
I have a question on the same
Yes.
point. So Dennis, your presentation shows this couple of slides on
Yes.
the 30 MGD joint project cost, the one that's not phased, shows for the joint intake the agency portion of 13 million.
Right.
Is that number reduced by this federal contribution?
Yeah, the cost of the intake structure itself, the physical cost or the construction cost of the intake that's being constructed jointly with RD 2035 is $40 million.
Right.
In addition to that, the agency will have to spend on the order of $7 million to have the DBO contractor install pumps and electrical gear for the agency. So you take the portion of the 40 million, roughly the 7, that is, we're asking for 34 million,
Yeah.
half from the state, half from the feds. The difference plus the portion that the DBO is for the equipment that the DBO contractor is going to install. The non-grant eligible plus that is the $13.1 million that you see here.
Okay, so I have a suggestion for future displays, that there be an indication, a footnote or something like the one that you've got in the DBO that describes the federal contribution, the state contribution, and the total cost with a footnote up to that agency portion.
Okay.
I think that it's possible that most folks would look at this and not get the point that there is additional funding being contributed and the cost would be significantly higher if it wasn't coming in.
Yeah, I do think, thank you, Don. I mean, I do think, just, only speaking for myself here, I mean, this just is challenging to follow. I mean, we're sharing the project with, another party. That split is 80-20. There's federal funding, there's state funding, there's a federal match, there's part of it that's not going to be within that project budget, but part of it that we're going to bid ourselves to get the benefit of the competitive bid. So whatever we can do to demonstrate that, and I know it's not easy, so thank you.
Understood. See if we can't come up with a
We'll let you, you're the
simple
attorney here,
explanation.
we'll let you draw that up somehow.
We need an accountant.
We need a message.
The attorney's the problem, not the solution. Okay, fair enough, thanks.
Very good. I have one question I think that perhaps could be asked here. Richard, as we all know, Davis has assigned 2 council members to come to Woodland to talk about whatever they anticipate. Those 2 council members are not members of this agency. However, the 2 council members in Woodland that will be dealing with that issue are members of this agency. Are there any problems that would confront us because of that?
Yeah, I assume you're referring to the Brown Act in terms of
Yes.
meetings. No, not under that scenario, because the 4 persons who would be gathering would not constitute a majority of this board, and it would involve a subset of 2. It's essentially kind of a 2-by-2 of less than a majority of each city council. So those discussions are okay outside the Brown Act, unless somehow that committee, that group evolves into a regular standing committee that's appointed somehow by this agency. But the ad hoc type discussions that are contemplated would not trigger the Brown Act.
Okay. Very good. We're at Technical Advisory Committee comments, and you're part of that committee, so go ahead.
Actually, I have a question that follows on with yours. Once that they meet in the negotiation, and then the two council members come back and discuss with the other council members what they found out, is there an issue at that point?
Well, at that point, then, it becomes a city council meeting, and offhand, I can't think of any closed sessions that would apply or allow for those discussions to take place in closed session. So at that point, then, each city would need to meet in an open and public agendized setting.
City of Woodland met with the Woodland Utility Rate Advisory Committee last night. This is an advisory committee that deals with all of the water utilities, sewer, water, and storm drain. They have expressed concern over the potential for additional costs. They spent almost 2 years working on the water rates and on the water project, surface water project, and they have expressed that they would like to have an opportunity to have some input on any additional costs to this project with the Davis and the negotiations, and they'll be wanting to, prior to the finalization, they'd like to come back and advise the Woodland Council on their points of view on that. That's all I have to report.
Other technical committee comments? Dennis, have we covered everything?
We have. One last item. At your places, there's a invitation to a tour of the new Stockton Delta Water Treatment Plant on September the 12th. So if any of the board members are interested in that, you can contact Linan, and she can make arrangements to sign you up.
Great. Thank you. The meeting's adjourned.
Good. Thank you.